Hands on the hood. You people always get rowdy when you're guilty. The command sliced through the calm afternoon, a weapon held mere inches from Calvin Brooks's back. It was steady, tinged with impatience. Rough hands shoved him forward, pressing his chest hard against the vehicle's hood. The metal felt like it was biting through his coat, as if compliance had to be hammered into his very being. "Stop resisting," the voice snapped, wrenching his arm higher and tightening the restraints. Even though Calvin remained motionless, he kept his gaze ahead, his breathing measured, his posture still. They had no inkling that the man they were subduing was one phone call away from dismantling everything they represented. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments section, and be sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you absolutely won't want to miss. Calvin Brooks glanced at his wrist as he stepped onto his front stoop, the morning sun warming his face. The folder he clutched contained grant application materials for a youth mentorship initiative, documents requiring signatures by midday. His tan overcoat lay impeccably pressed over a crisp white dress shirt and a tasteful blue tie, a polished image he'd cultivated over 2 decades of dedicated community service. The tranquil suburban street unfolded before him, bordered by immaculate lawns and American flags gracing every porch. Children's bicycles lay scattered on driveways, a quiet testament to the neighborhood's serene rhythm. Calvin drew in a deep breath, savoring the crisp autumn air as he began his descent down the walkway. A patrol car materialized, inching along slowly behind him as he proceeded. Calvin maintained his even stride, though a subtle tension tightened his shoulders. He'd learned long ago the wisdom of remaining composed when law enforcement appeared, regardless of how routine the interaction might seem. The engine suddenly roared to life. Tires crunched on the asphalt as the patrol car accelerated, the sound jarring the morning's quiet. Calvin's heart leaped, but he willed himself to continue walking, one deliberate step after another. Car doors flung open with metallic shrieks. "Stop right there!" a voice barked. Calvin froze mid-stride, his grip tightening on the folder's edge. 2 officers emerged, identified as Brent Clean and Ross Maddox, moving with an almost rehearsed aggression. Their boots scraped against the pavement as they fanned out, weapons appearing in their hands with unnerving swiftness. Both firearms were aimed directly at Calvin's chest, unwavering. From her vantage point at the front window, Linda Sutter observed the scene unfold. Her face wore an expression of keen anticipation as she peered through lace curtains, her hands clasped at her chest. Calvin's gaze met hers for a fleeting moment before he refocused on the immediate threat. "Hands where we can see them," Clean yelled, his voice sharp enough to cut through solid steel. Calvin slowly raised his palms, still holding the folder, his heart pounding against his ribs. Yet his voice remained level. "Officers, what is this about? I'm simply on my way to an appointment." "Shut up and drop the folder," Maddox snarled, advancing with his weapon trained on Calvin. Behind her curtain, Linda Sutter's lips curved into a faint smile. Calvin carefully placed the folder on the ground, his movements deliberate and slow. The grant papers within represented months of diligent work, but at this moment, they held no significance compared to his own safety. "I'm complying. Officers, please, tell me what this is concerning." "Turn around." "No. Stop. Get on your knees." Klein fired off commands in rapid succession, each one seeming to contradict the last. "Hands on your head. Face down. Don't move." Calvin's mind raced to process the conflicting instructions, while simultaneously keeping his body completely still. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the cool morning air. 20 years of navigating situations like this had instilled in him a practice of exaggerated caution, of speaking softly, of presenting himself as non-threatening as possible. "I'm following your instructions," he stated calmly, though his throat felt as dry as desert sand. "Please, just explain what's happening." Officer Maddox circled behind him, his boots crunching on fallen leaves. Calvin fought the instinctive urge to turn his head, keeping his eyes forward and his hands clearly visible. His legs trembled slightly from maintaining the awkward posture. Someone reported a suspicious individual, Klein sneered, his gun still aimed at Calvin's center mass. You fit the description. Calvin's stomach tightened. He knew precisely who had made that call and the underlying motive, but any argument would only exacerbate the situation. I reside here, officers. I am merely walking to an appointment. My identification is in my coat pocket should you wish to examine it. Did I tell you to speak? Klein's voice escalated sharply. Keep your mouth shut. Maddox moved closer, his presence a palpable threat behind Calvin's back. Without preamble, the officer seized Calvin's right arm, twisting it roughly behind him. The sudden motion threw Calvin off balance. He stumbled, attempting to maintain his footing while preserving his composure. Officer, please, I am not resisting. Stop resisting, Clene roared, his voice echoing down the quiet street. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Linda Sutter pressed closer to her window, absorbing the unfolding spectacle with undisguised relish. Other curtains began to flutter along the street as neighbors craned their necks, drawn by Clene's shout. The tranquil morning had dissolved into something grim and all too familiar. From her front porch across the street, Joan Pritchard emerged silently. Her phone was already raised. Her arthritis-gnarled fingers remained steady as she pressed record, capturing every moment of the unfolding event. Her doorbell camera blinked its silent red indicator, gathering evidence that would soon prove invaluable. Calvin remained immobile, despite the searing pain shooting through his contorted arm, despite the weapons still pointed at his chest. Despite the stark realization that this moment could very well be his last if he made the slightest misstep. His tie fluttered slightly in the morning breeze. The very tie he had so meticulously chosen to project professionalism, respectability, and safety. None of that seemed to matter now. The grand papers lay scattered across the sidewalk, caught by the wind. 20 years of careful living, of adhering to rules, of keeping his head down, all of it swept away as easily as those documents. Yet, Calvin maintained a steady voice, minimal movements, and his dignity intact. Even as Maddox's grip tightened painfully on his arm, even as Klein's finger tensed on the trigger, he refused to provide them with the reaction they so clearly desired. From his agonizing position, Calvin observed Officer Klein's boots scuffing against the pavement as the officer circled him like a predator. The morning sun glinted off the barrel of Klein's gun, still trained steadfastly on Calvin's chest. Every breath felt fraught with peril, every subtle movement a potential catalyst. I said, "Stop resisting," Klein's voice carried down the street, deliberately amplified, performing for an ever-growing audience. His free hand shot out, seizing Calvin's wrist and twisting it upward at an unnatural angle. Pain exploded through Calvin's arm and shoulder. His knees buckled involuntarily as white-hot agony coursed through his joints. Still, he fought to keep his voice steady, dignified. "Officer, please, I am complying. I am not resisting anything." "He's fighting," Clenny announced to the assembled neighborhood, twisting harder. "He's resisting arrest. Maddox, assist me in subduing him." Officer Maddox moved with practiced efficiency, his actions suggesting a familiarity with this kind of engagement. His hands locked onto Calvin's shoulders from behind, fingers digging into pressure points that sent fresh waves of pain through Calvin's body. "Stop moving," Maddox commanded, though Calvin had not shifted an inch. "I'm not," Calvin began to say, but Clene cut him off. "Shut your mouth." In one violent motion, Clene propelled Calvin forward while Maddox pushed from behind. Calvin's chest slammed against a patrol car's hood. the impact driving the air from his lungs. The metal felt searingly hot against his cheek in the morning sun. More sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Up and down the street, curtains twitched as neighbors peered out at the unfolding spectacle. Some filmed with their phones. Others quickly drew their blinds, electing not to witness what was transpiring in their peaceful suburb. Linda Sutter emerged from her residence, her phone clutched dramatically to her chest. She took small, theatrical steps down her front walkway, her face arranged in an expression of exaggerated distress, but her eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she watched Calvin being forced to the ground. "Officers," she called out, her voice trembling with feigned concern. "I'm so relieved you responded so swiftly. I was terrified when I saw him wandering through our neighborhood." Calvin felt the concrete scrape his knees as Maddox kicked his legs apart. The officer's knee pressed into his back, grinding him into the pavement. His immaculately pressed brown overcoat, selected with such care to convey respectability, was now marred with dirt and engine grease. "This is entirely unwarranted," Calvin managed to say, struggling to maintain a level voice despite the knee crushing his spine. "I live here. I'm merely trying to—" "Still running your mouth?" Clenny grabbed Calvin's arms, yanking them behind his back with excessive force. The handcuffs clicked shut, several notches too tight, the metal biting into Calvin's wrists. Perhaps a trip downtown will instill some respect. The folder Calvin had been carrying lay forgotten on the ground, its contents strewn across the sidewalk. Grant proposals and budget sheets fluttered in the morning breeze, some sliding into puddles, others snagging in nearby bushes. Months of work reduced to debris while neighbors watched from behind their windows. Additional patrol cars arrived, lights flashing, creating a carnival-like atmosphere. Each new siren drew more attention, more witnesses to Calvin's humiliation. He could feel the weight of their stares as he lay face down on the pavement. Linda Sutter had edged closer, her phone now raised to record the scene. "Officers," she stated loudly enough for all to hear, "I just want to express my gratitude for protecting our neighborhood. When I observed him walking about, I knew something was amiss. One can never be too cautious these days." Calvin closed his eyes briefly, understanding washing over him like icy water. This was not about law enforcement. This was not about safety. This was about putting him in his place, about making a spectacle of his dignity. Every shout, every rough handling, every tight clink of the restraints, it was all orchestrated to convey a message to him and to everyone observing. Cleany and Maddox hauled Calvin to his feet, gripping his arms with unwarranted force. His tie, the blue one he had chosen that morning, thinking it looked professional, hung askew, brushing against the patrol car's grimy fender. The officers made no move to assist him in regaining his balance as they marched him toward the rear seat. "Watch your head," Clenny said with mock politeness, then shoved Calvin down with such force that his forehead struck the doorframe. Pain exploded behind his eyes as they forced him into the back seat. The patrol car's interior reeked of stale sweat and despair. Through the window, Calvin watched his quiet suburban street transform into a spectacle of flashing lights and gaping onlookers. Linda Sutter stood at the center of it all, one hand pressed to her heart while the other held her phone steady, capturing every moment of his degradation. The door slammed shut with a heavy finality. In the rear-view mirror, Clenny's eyes met Calvin's, the officer's lips curling into a smirk of satisfaction. The same expression Calvin had seen countless times before. The look of a man who knew the system would shield him, regardless of his actions. As the patrol car pulled away, Calvin watched his street recede behind the scratched plexiglass divider. His wrists throbbed where the restraints bit into them. His shoulder ached from the forceful twisting. But more profound than the physical pain was the chilling knowledge that this display of power had achieved precisely what they had intended. to humiliate him publicly, to remind him and everyone watching that his dignity could be stripped away in an instant. From behind the scratched plexiglass window at the booking area, Officer Klein's pen scratched across paperwork with deliberate strokes. Subject exhibited aggressive resistance, he muttered as he wrote, each word falling like a hammer blow. Refused verbal commands, physically combative. Officer Maddox stood at his shoulder, adding his own embellishments. Demonstrated hostile behavior throughout the encounter, required significant force to subdue. Calvin watched them construct their version of events, his wrists still raw from the overly tight restraints. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the grimy white walls of the intake area. Other officers moved about, casting sideways glances at Calvin before quickly averting their eyes. "I need to speak with the supervisor," Calvin said, maintaining a steady voice despite the anger and fear churning in his gut. "This report is inaccurate. I never resisted." "Shut up," Klein snapped without looking up. "You'll have your opportunity to speak with someone when we deem it appropriate." "You mean when you finished fabricating your story?" The words escaped before Calvin could stop them, born of hours of humiliation and escalating frustration. Klein's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "You wish to add threatening an officer to that list? Keep running your mouth." A desk sergeant ambled over, a coffee cup in hand. "Problems?" "Nah," Maddox said smoothly. "Just another tough guy who doesn't know when to be quiet." They led Calvin down a narrow hallway to a small holding room with a metal table bolted to the floor. The chair scraped against the concrete as Klein pulled it out. "Sit," he ordered. "Perhaps some time in here will help you recall how this really transpired. Admit you became aggressive, and perhaps we can reach an understanding." Calvin lowered himself into the chair, his spine straight, his expression composed, despite the tremor of rage he felt. "I will not admit to something that did not occur." "Have it your way," Maddox said with a shrug. "Hope you don't have any pressing engagements this evening." The door closed with a heavy click, leaving Calvin alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of voices. His thoughts drifted to the scattered papers on the sidewalk. Grant proposals that had taken months to compile, now likely ruined. His meticulously planned day destroyed because someone decided his presence in his own neighborhood was a threat. Time stretched like taffy in that confined space. 1 hour bled into 2, then 3. No water, no bathroom break, just the constant awareness that this was another form of control, making him wait, making him question, wearing him down. The door creaked open suddenly, and a young officer poked his head in. "Brooks, you have a visitor." Calvin was escorted back to the front desk area. Joan Pritchard stood there, her silver hair impeccably neat, her posture ramrod straight. Despite her age, she exuded an energy that caused the officers behind the desk to shift uncomfortably. "I've brought some items that need to be officially logged as evidence," Joan announced, her librarian's voice cutting through the station's clamor. She placed a thick folder on the counter. "A comprehensive timeline of today's events, including timestamps from my doorbell camera, which captured the entire incident from multiple perspectives." The desk sergeant started to interject, but Joan continued as if he hadn't spoken. "I've also included detailed observations of what I witnessed, particularly the officer's escalation of force against an apparently compliant individual." She adjusted her spectacles. "I've already secured multiple backups of the video footage, of course. Standard archival procedure." The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. The desk sergeant picked up the folder with more deference than he had shown anything else that day. "We will investigate this matter," he said slowly. "Yes, you will," Joan agreed pleasantly. Her eyes met Calvin's. "Are you quite all right?" Calvin nodded, touched by her presence and her thorough preparation. "Trust a librarian to document everything. He is entitled to his phone call now," Joan informed the sergeant. It was not a request. Minutes later, Calvin stood at a wall-mounted telephone, his fingers hovering over the keypad. The card was years old, carried more out of habit than any real expectation. It contained the contact information of a White House liaison given to him after a community service recognition event. Ethan Ward had seemed genuinely impressed by Calvin's volunteer efforts, had told him to reach out if he ever required assistance. Calvin had never envisioned needing it in this manner. The station had grown noticeably quieter as nightfall approached. He could feel eyes on him. Clean and Maddox loitering near the desk, Jones' steadfast presence by the door, the curious glances of other officers. His hands wanted to tremble. He refused to let them. Carefully, deliberately, he dialed the number. Each digit felt like a step into uncharted territory. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, as Calvin's heart hammered against his ribs. This could be his sole opportunity to preempt the false narrative being constructed against him. On the 4th ring, just as doubt began to surface, the line clicked. "This is Ethan Ward's office," a crisp voice answered. Calvin took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and prepared to make the most crucial call of his life. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Papers rustled at the desk where Clenny and Maddox had ceased their pretense of work, now openly observing him. Joan stood like a sentinel by the door. Her presence served as a stark reminder that someone had witnessed the truth, had documented it, had refused to look away. The receiver felt heavy in Calvin's hand as he prepared to speak, knowing these next words could determine whether justice would be buried beneath bureaucratic paperwork or brought forcefully into the light. From the phone's receiver, Calvin heard rustling papers and the rhythmic sound of typing. He kept his voice low but clear. "Mr. Ward, this is Calvin Brooks. We met 3 years ago at the Community Leadership Recognition event. I need to report a violation of civil rights." "Mr. Brooks? Yes, I recall your work with the youth mentorship program." Ethan's casual tone shifted to something more measured. "Please proceed with the facts." Calvin gripped the phone tighter, acutely aware of the watchful eyes upon him. "Today, at approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was walking to an appointment in my neighborhood. 2 officers, Brent Clean and Ross Maddox, approached me with weapons drawn. I complied with all commands, but they alleged I was resisting. They arrested me at gunpoint. There is video evidence, but I am concerned it may disappear." The typing on the other end ceased. "Are you currently in custody?" "Yes. At the central station, they are still processing the paperwork."
"Are you injured?" "No serious injuries. Some bruising from the handcuffs."
One moment, the line went silent except for the rapid clicking of keys. "Mr. Brooks, I am connecting you to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division intake line. They will record your statement. Following that, I strongly advise you to seek legal counsel immediately and meticulously document everything. Times, names, badge numbers, witnesses. Can you do that?" "Yes," Calvin replied, his chest tightening with relief that someone was finally listening. "My neighbor has already secured backup of the video footage." "Good. Please hold for the transfer." A new voice came onto the line. Crisp, professional, female. "This is Special Agent Monica Torres. I am recording this call. Please state your name and location." Calvin repeated his account, adding every detail he could recall. Behind him, he heard footsteps quickening, voices dropping to whispers. A sergeant hurried past, a phone pressed to his ear. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks," Agent Torres said when he finished. "We are initiating preliminary inquiries. Do not discuss this call with the officers. If they inquire, simply state you have contacted your attorney." The call ended, but its repercussions rippled through the station instantaneously. The desk area had become a hive of nervous energy. Officers clustered in corners, conversing in hushed tones. Phones rang at multiple desks. Calvin caught fragments of conversations as he was led back to the holding bench. Chief Vance must be informed. A federal investigation is already underway. Body camera footage has been secured. This situation could prove quite serious. Officer Cleaney walked past, his earlier swagger completely absent, replaced by a rigid stance and a grim, set jaw. He avoided making eye contact with Calvin. Officer Maddox was nowhere to be found. In the main hall, Joan Pritchard sat bolt upright in a hard plastic chair, her cell phone clutched in her hands. Her fingers moved with unwavering speed across the screen, meticulously creating a digital trail that could never be expunged. She had positioned herself to have a clear vantage point of both entrances and the booking counter, diligently recording every activity, much like the meticulous keeper of records she had been for the past 4 decades. The overall atmosphere of the precinct had undergone a dramatic shift. The prevailing sense of casual indifference had evaporated, replaced by a palpable undercurrent of unease. Officers who had previously paid Calvin no mind were now casting furtive, wary glances in his direction. A young clerk at the front desk was speaking into her phone in a hushed tone, saying, "Yes, sir. Chief Vance is being updated at this very moment." More senior officers began to materialize, their polished badges glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. They gathered in a tight huddle near the watch commander's office, their gestures animated as they consulted papers and looked at their phones. Calvin recognized the palpable shift in authority. He was no longer just another individual taken into custody to be processed and subsequently forgotten. He had unexpectedly transformed into a problem they had not foreseen. The minutes slowly ticked by. Joan's steadfast presence served as an anchor for him as she continued her quiet, methodical documentation. Occasionally, she would meet his gaze and offer a subtle nod, a silent reassurance that every single detail was being faithfully recorded. Her phone would emit a soft buzz, prompting her to compose and send another message, thereby reinforcing their account of the truth through redundancy. Around 1:15 the main door of the station swung open. A woman entered, wearing a sharp blazer, a badge suspended from a chain around her neck. The low murmur of conversation throughout the station ceased instantly. She moved with the assured confidence of someone accustomed to probing uncomfortable questions and expecting forthright answers. "Lieutenant Sandra Pike, Internal Affairs," she announced to the watch commander. Her voice resonated clearly across the now silent room. "Where are Officers Clean and Maddox?" "Break room," someone mumbled. "Fetch them." The authoritative tone of Pike left no room for procrastination. She then turned her attention to the desk sergeant. "I require their body cameras. All footage from today's entire shift, effective immediately." The sergeant shifted uneasily. "Ma'am, there is a protocol for that." That protocol was amended approximately 20 minutes ago when this escalated to a federal inquiry. Pike cut him off sharply. "Cameras now. And if anyone has accessed that footage within the last 6 hours, I want to know precisely who and the reasoning behind it." Calvin observed as the meticulously constructed narrative of the police station began to unravel. The officers, who had moments before exuded an air of unshakable authority, now moved with the jerky, uncertain energy of individuals realizing their actions were about to be subjected to intense scrutiny. Clean and Maddox emerged from the break room, their faces ashen under the stark illumination. Joan caught Calvin's eye once more and briefly held up her phone. She had been correct. The truth undeniably required witnesses, and witnesses, in turn, necessitated contingency plans. While the system had anticipated Calvin's complete absorption into its bureaucratic machinery, he had instead managed to connect with individuals capable of illuminating its darkest recesses. The station clock inched closer to the midnight hour. Lieutenant Pike stood by the booking counter, Her presence, akin to a stone dropped into placid water, sending out widening ripples of consequence in every conceivable direction. Her voice pierced the thick, tense silence. Where are the body cameras? The station's fluorescent lights cast sharp, dramatic shadows as Lieutenant Pike stood at the desk, her presence commanding the attention of everyone present. Chief Mallory Vance, with a slight disarray in his usually immaculate appearance, his tie askew and his suit jacket creased from a hurried arrival, burst through the door. "Lieutenant Pike," he began, attempting a diplomatic smile, "this late-night visit is rather unexpected." "Chief Vance," Pike replied, her voice unwavering, "I require immediate access to all footage and documentation pertaining to today's apprehension of Calvin Brooks. Body cameras, dispatch logs, booking recordings, the entire lot." Vance's smile tightened perceptibly. "There are established procedures for requesting such materials." "This is no longer a request," Pike stated, holding up her phone. "I possess direct authorization from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. They anticipate receiving preliminary evidence within the hour." The color drained from Vance's face. Behind him, Officer Clean fidgeted nervously, while Officer Maddox stared resolutely ahead, his jaw clenched tight. "Officers Clean and Maddox," Pike called out, "surrender your badges and service weapons. You are both on administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation." "This is preposterous," Clean protested. "We were responding to a legitimate call." Pike's tone could have frozen water. "Or perhaps we should discuss your resistance to a lawful directive?" The profound irony was not lost on Calvin, who watched from his bench as Clean's hands trembled while he handed over his badge. Maddox moved with a robotic, detached efficiency, his face a mask of practiced impassivity. Lieutenant Pike continued, "I expect full access to your evidence storage facility, and I require your technical personnel to confirm that no recordings have been altered in any way." Vance's polished composure began to crack further. "Lieutenant, surely we can manage this matter internally. That window of opportunity has passed, now that federal authorities are involved." Pike gestured to two officers who had accompanied her. "Secure the evidence room. No one enters without my explicit authorization." Joan Pritchard remained in the lobby, her phone continuously active. She had been transmitting updates to a secure email account throughout the entire night, meticulously creating a time-stamped record that could not be erased. Calvin noticed how the other officers gave her a wide berth, as if her meticulous documentation radiated some form of invisible hazard. Through the station's windows, Calvin observed a news van pulling up. Maya Whitfield, known for her relentless investigative reporting, emerged from the vehicle accompanied by a cameraman. The night shift sergeant uttered a quiet curse. "Chief," Pike said, her voice calm, "I would advise you to prepare a statement. Ms. Whitfield appears quite eager for commentary." Vance retreated to his office, already engaged in numerous phone calls. The station buzzed with urgent whispers and hurried movements. Evidence technicians arrived, equipped with laptops and external storage devices, their expressions grim as Pike oversaw the transfer of data. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, D.A. Tripp Sloan arrived, his expensive suit a stark contrast to his visibly agitated demeanor. He huddled with Vance, their hushed, intense conversation occasionally punctuated by audible fragments. "Can't let this escalate further. Federal involvement already. We need to maintain some semblance of control." Sloan then approached Calvin, his smile as genuine as artificial foliage. "Mr. Brooks, you are free to depart. However," he paused, letting the implication hang in the air, "the charge of resisting will still be processed. Your court date will be within the next 30 days. Calvin stood, his dignity uncompromised despite his profound exhaustion. "You intend to charge me with resisting when the evidence clearly demonstrates I complied?" "Evidence can be interpreted in numerous ways, Mr. Brooks," Sloan replied smoothly. "Perhaps you will reconsider your approach to this matter before that date arrives." The threat was unmistakably clear: either stand down or face the full, unyielding force of the system. Calvin straightened his tie. It was wrinkled, but still properly knotted. "I look forward to presenting the truth in court." As dawn began to break, Calvin walked out of the station, Joan by his side like a vigilant guardian. Maya Whitfield approached, the harsh glare of her camera light piercing the growing morning. "Mr. Brooks," she called out, "could you possibly tell us what transpired today?" Calvin paused, acutely aware of the eyes watching him from the station's windows. "I was arrested at gunpoint simply for walking down my own street. The officers claimed I was resisting, despite my full compliance with every single directive." "The truth is documented on video," Joan added firmly. "My doorbell camera captured everything. Multiple copies are secured in various locations." Maya's eyes lit up with professional interest. "And is it accurate that federal authorities are involved in this matter?" "I cannot comment on ongoing investigations," Calvin replied, recalling Agent Torres's prior counsel. The sky gradually painted itself in hues of pink and gold as Calvin finally approached his front porch. Joan had insisted on accompanying him home, her presence offering both comfort and a reliable witness. His hands were steady as he reached for his front door, but his heart faltered when he noticed a piece of paper tucked into the doorframe. The note, typed in stark black letters, read, "We know where you live." John swiftly plucked it from the door before Calvin could touch it. "Evidence bag in my vehicle," she stated calmly. "They are not as intelligent as they perceive themselves to be. Printer paper carries batch identification numbers." Maya, the reporter, was already approaching with her camera, meticulously documenting the ominous threat. Calvin stood straighter, adjusting his tie one final time. The brown overcoat he had worn since the beginning of the day still hung neatly, a testament to his enduring composure. He was weary, but by no means broken. His dignity remained an unassailable weapon they could not confiscate. Back inside the station, the layers of complication continued to unfold as Pike's voice cut through the morning shift change. "These body cameras had better be exactly as they were captured. If I discover even a single second of footage that has been tampered with, careers will be terminated today." The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting elongated shadows across Calvin's lawn. The suburban quietude felt different now, less peaceful and more watchful. However, Calvin had successfully disrupted a system that had fully expected him to simply vanish. And though that system was now wounded and undoubtedly angered, he would not be intimidated into backing down. Not any longer. Joan carefully sealed the threatening note within a clear evidence bag. Her movements were precise and deliberate. Maya's camera captured the entire process, ensuring that the truth would be witnessed by many eyes. Calvin's phone buzzed. It was another message from Agent Torres. "Evidence preservation team arriving within the hour. Please remain safe." The morning sunlight streamed through Calvin's kitchen window, yet it brought no discernible warmth. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup, the dark liquid rippling like his own unsettled nerves. The morning news played softly on his small countertop radio. The local station was already presenting its own version of yesterday's events. "Just a routine stop," the police spokesperson claimed. "Officers were following standard procedure." Calvin picked up his phone, dreading the call he was obligated to make. After 3 rings, Sharon from Human Resources answered with a practiced professional detachment. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice cool and measured, "we have been anticipating your call." "Sharon, I need to explain what occurred." "The company has already been apprised of the situation," she interrupted. "Given the current circumstances and the pending charges, you are being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. This leave is unpaid and is pending the outcome of the investigation." Calvin's throat tightened. "But I haven't been convicted of anything. I was wrongfully..." This is standard procedure, Mr. Brooks, Sharon stated, her tone unwavering. We will require you to return all company property within 48 hours. Your building access has been temporarily suspended. The line went dead before he could offer any further response. 15 years of an unblemished professional record had been erased with a single phone call. The looming mortgage payment was only 2 weeks away. A gentle knock at his back door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Joan Pritchard stood there, her arms laden with grocery bags, her silver hair neatly styled despite the early hour. You need to eat, she announced, bustling in without waiting for an invitation. And we need to formulate a plan. She began unpacking with methodical efficiency. Bread, eggs, fruit, coffee, enough provisions for several days. From her ever-present tote bag, she produced a crisp folder. I have commenced our documentation process, she said, spreading various papers across his kitchen table. Witness names, precise timestamps, locations of security cameras. We require redundant copies stored in multiple secure locations that they cannot access. Calvin gazed at the growing pile of documents. They've already impacted my job. As expected, Joan replied grimly. They will attempt to isolate you first, cut off your resources, your support systems, make you feel utterly alone. She then squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. But you are not alone. His doorbell rang. Deacon Harold Hal Mercer stood on the front porch, his weathered face etched with genuine concern. Calvin admitted him, noticing how Hal's eyes swept the street before he stepped inside. The church council convened an early meeting this morning, Hal stated, settling into a kitchen chair. We stand with you, Calvin, but I must be candid. This will not be an easy endeavor. Some individuals are already labeling you as a troublemaker. Let me guess, Joan interjected sharply. Linda Sutter has been vocal. Hal nodded. Her Facebook post has garnered hundreds of shares. She wrote that she was merely trying to safeguard our neighborhood and observed him acting suspiciously, moving with haste and observing houses. Calvin's coffee suddenly tasted bitter. I was walking to my car, wearing a tie. It matters little to them, Hal, Joan stated. They will construct whatever narrative serves their immediate purpose. Joan's phone buzzed. She read the message and sat up straighter. Renee Alvarez has agreed to meet us at 2 o'clock. She is taking the case. The civil rights attorney. Hal's eyebrows rose in surprise. That is excellent news. You will certainly need her extensive experience. Calvin checked his own phone. There were dozens of missed calls, numerous messages from concerned friends, and a single text message from an unknown number. Should have just cooperated. The morning dragged by interminably. Calvin observed more patrol cars than usual cruising slowly down his street. Neighbors walked their dogs on the opposite side of the road, some deliberately avoiding eye contact, while others stared for an uncomfortably long duration. Around noon, a local news van parked briefly before Joan marched out and firmly instructed them to respect private property. At precisely 2 o'clock, Renee Alvarez arrived, her stylish pantsuit and professional briefcase radiating an aura of capable competence. She wasted no time on trivial pleasantries. They will employ procedural tactics as a form of punishment, she stated, arranging files on Calvin's table. Court dates that invariably conflict with your work schedule. Schedule check-ins designed specifically to disrupt your daily routine. Paperwork that is perpetually, inexplicably incomplete. But the evidence, Calvin began, can it truly vanish? Files can become corrupted, Renee interjected. Footage can be misplaced. Witnesses can suddenly suffer memory lapses. She fixed Calvin with a steady, piercing gaze. This situation transcends the actions of 2 individual officers. The entire department will mobilize to protect their constructed narrative. Joan produced her own meticulously organized files. I have already created backup copies of all pertinent information, multiple formats, stored in multiple locations. Renee nodded approvingly. Excellent. D.A. Sloan is an ambitious individual. He will undoubtedly endeavor to make an example out of Calvin, portraying him as aggressive and uncooperative, the kind of case that resonates favorably with certain segments of the electorate. But the White House liaison, Calvin began, recalling the intervention, bought us valuable time and significant attention.
Indeed, Renee agreed. However, local courts operate on local timelines. Sloan is acutely aware of this fact. He will prolong this process, exhaust you, and ultimately make you desire a plea just to achieve some semblance of normalcy. She opened her laptop, her fingers moving with remarkable speed. We must proactively anticipate their moves. John's footage clearly demonstrates your compliance. We possess timestamps that conclusively prove the initial 911 call was suspicious. There is a discernible pattern here. Our sole objective is to compel them to confront it. Calvin's kitchen had effectively transformed into a strategic command center. John meticulously organized the evidence in chronological order, while Hal made phone calls to church members who had directly witnessed the arrest. Renee drafted legal motions, her rapid typing punctuated by incisive observations regarding procedural violations. Tomorrow's arraignment is of paramount importance, Renee explained. They will attempt to impose stringent release conditions, restricted movement, frequent check-ins, possibly even electronic monitoring, all meticulously designed to dismantle your established routine and erode your dignity. She looked up from her screen, her expression grave. I have encountered this strategy many times before. They are betting on you succumbing to the immense pressure. They anticipate you accepting a plea agreement simply to reclaim your life. Calvin straightened his tie. The same blue one he had worn the previous day, it now served as a silent symbol of defiance. They have miscalculated their wager. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his kitchen floor. Outside, another patrol car cruised by, moving at a slower pace than was typical. Joan documented its license plate number without uttering a word. Hal prayed quietly in the corner, his presence a steadying anchor. Renee closed one file and immediately opened another. 7 o'clock, she stated. Let us meticulously review our strategy for the upcoming day. The court appearance is merely the initial engagement in this prolonged battle. They are counting on you, confronting this entirely on your own. The fluorescent lights of the courthouse hallways cast stark, unforgiving shadows across Calvin's face as he straightened his blue tie. The very same tie he had worn during the arrest, it now served as a subtle but potent statement of defiance. Renee Alvarez stood beside him, her briefcase at the ready, her posture exuding calm authority. Remember, she murmured, her voice low, they are actively seeking a reaction. Do not provide them with one. The polished wooden benches lining the hall were already occupied by mourning defendants, yet a noticeable clearing remained around Calvin, as if proximity to him might prove somehow contagious. Joan Pritchard arrived, her notebook and pen already in hand, settling onto a bench with the precise efficiency of a librarian. That Trip Sloan strode past, his expensive suit a sharp contrast to the milling crowd. He barely glanced at Calvin, but his dismissive smirk conveyed everything that needed to be understood. Two uniformed officers stood flanking the courtroom doors, their hands resting a little too casually on their service weapons. Intimidation theater, Renee whispered, part of the standard playbook. Inside the courtroom, the polished surfaces gleamed under an abundance of fluorescent lights. The American flag hung limply in a corner, its promise of justice feeling rather distant. Calvin took his place beside Renee, acutely conscious of every eye watching him, waiting for him to confirm their ingrained prejudices. Docket number 47329, the clerk announced. The State versus Calvin Brooks
on the charge of resisting arrest. DA Sloan rose, straightening his tie with meticulously manicured fingers.
Your Honor, the defendant exhibited aggressive behavior during what was a routine stop. Officers were compelled to respond to his confrontational stance. Objection, René interjected smoothly. Counsel is editorializing and presenting opinions without supporting evidence. The judge, a slender man named Harrison with wire-rimmed glasses, nodded slightly. Noted. Please continue, Mr. Sloan. Sloan produced a document with a deliberate theatrical flourish. We have received a statement from Chief Vance's office commending Officers Clean and Maddox for their professional handling of a volatile situation. Calvin's hands clenched beneath the table, but his facial expression remained carefully neutral. The so-called volatile situation had apparently been him walking to his car. Furthermore, Sloan continued, given the defendant's hostile attitude— Objection, René interrupted again. Characterization without any factual foundation. Sustained. Judge Harrison sighed audibly. Mr. Sloan, kindly confine yourself to presenting established facts. But the damage, as it often did, had already been done. The word hostile hung in the air like lingering smoke. Calvin noticed the court reporter's fingers momentarily hesitate over her keyboard, as if even she felt the tangible weight of the narrative being actively constructed. The state therefore requests strict release conditions, Mr. Sloan pressed. Daily check-ins at the police station, travel restricted solely to work and home, absolutely no contact with any potential witnesses. René stood. Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. He is a respected professional with deep roots and ties within the community. These proposed conditions are punitive in nature and entirely unnecessary. Judge Harrison peered over his glasses. Mr. Brooks, do you fully comprehend that any violation of these release conditions will result in your immediate detention? Yes, Your Honor. Calvin kept his voice steady and measured, providing them with nothing that could be twisted or misconstrued. Very well, the judge stated, shuffling through several papers. Release conditions are set as follows. Check-ins will occur 3 times per week at the police station. Travel is restricted to your place of employment, your residence, and essential services strictly within city limits. You are to have no contact whatsoever with Officers Cleany or Maddox or any potential witnesses. Behind Calvin, Joan's pen scratched steadily across her notebook, meticulously documenting every word spoken. The conditions themselves were clearly designed to suffocate his daily routine. Check-ins scheduled for times when most people would be commencing their workday, and travel limitations that would complicate even the most basic errands. Additionally, the judge continued, the defendant must surrender his passport and maintain his current employment. Calvin felt the cruel sting of irony. They had already compelled his employer to place him on involuntary suspension. René's hand briefly touched his arm, a silent signal to maintain his composure. Outside the courtroom, reporters clustered like hungry birds. Maya Whitfield stepped forward, her press badge catching the light. Unlike the others, her microphone was not thrust aggressively forward. Mr. Brooks? She asked quietly. Did you resist? The hallway fell silent. Other reporters leaned in, their cameras whirring. Calvin met Maya's gaze directly. I survived, he answered, his dignity fully intact. The whispers commenced immediately. Court staff observed from doorways. A passing bailiff's hand drifted instinctively towards his weapon. The unspoken message was abundantly clear. How dare he survive without offering an apology? Linda Sutter stood near the elevator, clutching her purse as if it were a protective shield. Her eyes met Calvin's briefly before skittering away, but not before he detected a flicker of satisfaction within them. She had ignited the fuse with her phone call, and now she was observing the ensuing explosion from a secure distance. Your next check-in is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, the court clerk announced, handing Calvin a stack of papers. Any missed check-in will result in the immediate issuance of a warrant. 8 o'clock, the exact time when most individuals would be starting their workday. Calvin accepted the papers without comment, feeling the inexorable grinding of the system's gears coming into motion. Joan approached, her notebook filled with fresh, pertinent observations. This morning, I observed 4 distinct occurrences, all exhibiting similar characteristics: stringent regulations, mandatory morning check-ins, and limitations on movement. These actions suggest a practiced approach.
Renee acknowledged this somberly, noting that such measures are employed to exert control. It felt like a slow erosion of freedom. Descending the courthouse steps seemed more arduous than ascending them. An unusual number of law enforcement vehicles patrolled the vicinity. Calvin noticed Officer Maddox observing from a stationary cruiser across the street, not conspicuously, but with a deliberate visibility. His phone vibrated. Another communication from an unknown source read, "You should have remained silent." Renee advised against any interaction, pointing out the message's timestamp. She stated, "That's precisely what they desire." The morning sun felt devoid of warmth despite the unclouded sky. The usual city traffic navigated around the courthouse, the world continuing as if undisturbed. Yet, Calvin perceived the invisible constraints being erected: the check-ins, the restrictions, the surveillance, a form of confinement constructed from regulations rather than physical barriers. Maya Whitfield caught up with them in the parking area. "Mr. Brooks," she stated, "I would appreciate the opportunity for a comprehensive interview to present your account accurately." Before Calvin could respond, Renee replied, "We will consider it. Our current priority is the compilation of documentation." Joan held up her notebook, announcing, "Everything has been recorded: timings, identification numbers, statements. They cannot erase what we have documented." Within the community center, the overhead fluorescent lights hummed as individuals occupied rows of metal chairs. The air conditioning struggled to mitigate the palpable tension emanating from the gathering. Calvin sat between Renee and Joan, with the reassuring presence of Deacon Hal Mercer positioned behind them. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of coffee and an undercurrent of palpable hostility. Chief Mallory Vance approached the rostrum, his badge glinting. His impeccably neat uniform and practiced smile conveyed an aura of authority, devoid of overt coercion. It was a demonstration of controlled communication. "Good evening, esteemed residents," he commenced, his voice smooth and resonant. "We are assembled today to address recent occurrences that have caused apprehension within our community." Linda Sutter occupied a prominent position in the front row, her manicured hands tightly gripping tissues. Her display of distress elicited sympathetic murmurs from those around her. "Public safety necessitates mutual trust," Vance continued. A contingent of uniformed officers near the wall offered approving nods as he spoke of officers encountering resistance. Though Officer Clean was absent, his supporters made their presence felt through pointed applause at the mention of resistance. Joan's pen moved diligently across her notebook, meticulously recording each deliberate word and orchestrated response. Beside her, Renee swiftly typed notes into her phone, contributing to the chronicle of the narrative being shaped. "Mrs. Sutter," Vance addressed her respectfully, "would you care to share your experience?" Linda rose, dabbing at her eyes, which appeared dry. "I was terribly frightened," she faltered, "when I observed him surveying houses in our neighborhood." Calvin interjected quietly. "I was walking to my vehicle." However, the moderator, a slender man named Peterson, raised his hand, signaling for quiet. Linda continued, her voice gaining strength as she felt the support of her audience. "I acted as we are always instructed. If you see something, say something." The officers conducted themselves with utmost professionalism, even when he became uncooperative. Further approving murmurs and pointed glances were directed at Calvin.
"Thank you for your bravery," Vance declared solemnly. "This exemplifies precisely why community vigilance is essential."
Deacon Hal's hand briefly rested on Calvin's shoulder, offering steady support. The tension in Calvin's jaw eased slightly, though his gaze remained sharp, observing everything. When the moderator opened the floor for comments, Calvin stood. Peterson's hand immediately went up. "Perhaps," Peterson suggested with feigned concern, "Mr. Brooks would prefer a private discussion with Chief Vance at a later time. These emotions are still quite raw." Renee's voice cut through the murmurs, her tone professional and precise. "Silencing the truth does not serve justice. If the facts support your narrative, they can withstand public scrutiny." Maya Whitfield's camera captured the exchange, documenting Peterson's evident discomfort and Vance's carefully neutral demeanor.
Now, Peterson attempted to placate. "We are striving for community healing by excluding a portion of our residents." Jones' question, imbued with the experience of observing similar tactics over many years, carried significant weight. The mood of the assembly shifted palpably, akin to the atmosphere preceding a storm. From a partially obscured position in the back, someone deliberately uttered a racial slur, the sound echoing off the walls. Calvin did not react outwardly. He did not raise his voice. He calmly retrieved his phone and began recording, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The act of documentation itself became a form of defiance. "Name, badge number, and timestamp," he stated clearly, panning his phone across the uniformed officers who remained unresponsive to the slur. "Noted," Vance's composed expression faltered slightly. This deviation from the expected script was unexpected. The intended target was not adhering to the predetermined role of either aggressor or apologist. Other voices from the crowd began to rise. "Why are you causing problems? Just apologize." Deacon Hal intervened with a commanding voice that demanded attention. "Let us return to the order of business. The bylaws stipulate that speakers must be recognized and identified. Therefore, we require names accompanying such comments." The individuals who had shouted fell silent, unwilling to claim ownership of their remarks. Linda Sutter rose again, gripping the back of her chair. "I simply don't comprehend why he is making this so difficult. The officers were performing their duties." Renee's eyebrow arched. "Is it standard departmental procedure to draw weapons on unarmed civilians walking to their vehicles? Or to fabricate charges of resistance without provocation? Please cite the relevant regulations." Peterson fumbled with his papers. "We are not here to debate police procedures." "Precisely," Calvin stated quietly. "You are here to coerce me into accepting injustice." He turned to face the assembled crowd directly. "I will not apologize for walking while black in my own neighborhood. I will not apologize for surviving an armed encounter that I did not initiate. And I will not apologize for demanding accountability." He walked toward the exit, his steps measured and dignified. Joan, Renee, and Deacon Hall moved with him, not in a hasty retreat, but as a conscious decision to disengage from the charade. Maya's camera followed their departure, capturing the striking contrast between Calvin's composure and the visibly displeased expressions of those remaining. She observed Vance discreetly checking his phone with a look of sudden concern, clearly indicating that higher authorities were now involved. The parking lot was dimly lit, punctuated by scattered security lamps. Calvin's vehicle was parked alone towards the rear, and even from a distance, the spiderweb-like crack across its windshield was apparent. The message conveyed was as crude as it was unmistakable. His phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unlisted number. The voice, tinged with artificial bravado, hissed, "We will make you an example." Renee immediately began documenting the threat, while Joanne photographed the damage to the windshield. Deacon Hal surveyed the empty lot with a practiced vigilance, noting the positions of surveillance cameras. "They are escalating," Renee observed, "because dignity poses a greater threat to them than anger." Calvin touched the fractured glass, his reflection distorted but unbroken.
They wish for me to choose between dignity and safety. I choose both. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds in Renee's office, casting parallel stripes across stacks of documents and photographs arranged on the conference table. The collected evidence meticulously recounted their experience in precise detail. Images with timestamps, written testimonies, and footage from multiple perspectives presented the irrefutable truth they sought to safeguard. Joan Pritchard sat upright in her chair, methodically guiding them through her meticulously organized system. Her silver hair caught the light as she indicated each carefully labeled file. "I have been a librarian for 40 years, she explained, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had dedicated decades to the preservation of knowledge. "The first principle you learn is that information is not secure unless it is redundant." She opened her laptop, revealing an elaborate spreadsheet. Every piece of evidence exists in 5 separate locations, 3 digital and 2 physical, all with documented chains of custody. Her mouse navigated through folders, external drives, cloud storage, and printed copies stored in 2 distinct places, each bearing verifiable timestamps. Renee leaned forward, scrutinizing the doorbell camera footage that John had meticulously preserved. The video quality was exceptionally clear. Calvin's hands were raised, palms open, his posture unmistakably non-threatening. Officer Klein's aggressive stance dominated the frame, his weapon drawn despite the absence of any discernible threat. "The audio is what truly seals it," John remarked, increasing the volume. Calvin's calm voice emerged distinctly. "I am complying, sir," immediately followed by Klein's manufactured urgency. "Stop resisting." "This is precisely what we require," Renee declared, already accessing motion templates on her computer. The disparity between the actual events and the constructed narrative could not be more evident. She picked up her phone and dialed Lieutenant Sandra Pike's direct number. "Lieutenant Renee Alvarez reporting. I am preparing to submit motions accompanied by compelling evidence. I need confirmation that you have secured the department's footage as well." Joanne continued her organized work while Renee spoke, her actions precise and purposeful. She had meticulously compiled logs of every witness statement, every threatening note, and every instance of intimidation they had documented. "Observe this pattern," she said, spreading out a timeline. "The escalation is not random. Every time we present evidence, they respond with increased pressure. That indicates consciousness of guilt." Maya Whitfield arrived shortly before noon, accompanied by her cameraman. She carefully reviewed the footage, posing pertinent questions regarding verification and sources. Her professionalism was evident in every detail. "This is not about sensationalism," Maya stated, taking notes. "It is about presenting precisely what transpired without any commentary. The facts speak for themselves." Her segment was broadcast that afternoon. The station aired it without embellishment, eschewing dramatic music or emotional manipulation, instead presenting clear footage of an individual being targeted, complete with timestamp verification and expert analysis comparing standard police procedures with the actual events. The impact was immediate. Phones began to ring and emails flooded in. Older residents in particular recognized the tactics being employed, the sort of institutional pressure they had witnessed used to suppress truth in the past. "My mother contacted me," Maya reported later. "She has resided here for 40 years. She mentioned she had always suspected such occurrences, but now she possesses tangible proof. She is incensed, and she is not alone." Deacon Hal arrived mid-afternoon, his calm demeanor filling the space. "We are convening this evening," he announced, "not for protest, not for vocal opposition, but simply to stand in solidarity and demonstrate to Calvin that he is not isolated." He produced his own notebook. "I have 20 senior church members who have documented comparable incidents over the years. They are now prepared to speak, having been encouraged by someone who broke the silence." Calvin remained quiet for much of the day, observing as the truth solidified within files and footage.
The burden that had weighed upon him since his arrest seemed to lighten with each new layer of verification. "This is truly happening," he murmured. "They cannot simply make it vanish." "No, they cannot," Renee agreed, printing another copy of the motion. "Tomorrow's hearing has the potential to dismiss this charge. The evidence is exceptionally clear and thoroughly documented." Joan placed a hand on his arm. "That is precisely why I began recording the moment I witnessed them approaching you, because truth requires the means to cut through falsehoods." The community gathering that evening unfolded precisely as Deacon Hal had envisioned: dignified, resolute, and impossible to dismiss as mere disgruntled agitation. Silver-haired elders stood alongside young professionals. Children held small signs bearing the simple message, "Truth matters." They did not march. They did not chant. They simply stood together in the church parking lot. It was a quiet testament to solidarity that garnered coverage on the evening news, juxtaposed with Maya's footage. "This is their greatest apprehension," Renee observed, watching the broadcast. "Not violence, not shouting, but calm, documented truth supported by community testimony." Back in her office, the day's success felt tangible as she prepared to secure the evidence for the night. The footage that would resolve this case was ready for the following day's hearing. She initiated a copy to the secure drive, observing the progress bar advance steadily across her screen. At 98%, everything ceased. The screen flickered once and then went completely black. Joan's emphasis on redundancy would prove prescient sooner than anyone anticipated. The simple progress bar served as a stark reminder. While truth might possess sharp edges, corruption wielded claws that reached into the digital abyss. Renee's fingers flew across the keyboard, but her commands were met with no response. The black screen mocked her efforts, concealing the extent of the damage behind its dark facade. Calvin stood behind her chair, his reflection appearing as a ghost on the dormant monitor. "No, no, no," Renee muttered, forcing herself to slow down and approach the situation systematically. She reached for her phone, already dialing IT support. "This is not a malfunction. This is a targeted attack." Joan produced her own laptop, checking their backup repositories. Her expression tightened. "The shared drive is displaying excess errors. Someone has infiltrated the system." Renee switched to her backup computer, logging into their secure server. Red flags proliferated everywhere: altered timestamps, missing files, corrupted data. The meticulously prepared package for court had been dismantled with surgical precision. "They knew exactly what to target," Renee stated, her voice tight with controlled anger. "This was not random. They went directly for the authenticated copies we required for tomorrow's hearing." Calvin sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping. "How? The system was supposed to be secure." "Systems are only as secure as the individuals who manage them," Joan replied, her fingers still typing. Her screen displayed numerous folders, each meticulously categorized according to her precise organizational system. "But they underestimate librarians. We believe in redundancy." She opened her email, revealing dozens of messages sent to herself, each containing fragments of evidence with verified timestamps. "Every time I updated our files, I dispatched encrypted copies through various channels. They cannot erase what they cannot locate." Renee was already meticulously documenting the intrusion, capturing screenshots of access logs and error notifications. "This confirms consciousness of guilt. They are destroying evidence. That constitutes a separate offense." A sharp rap on the office door startled them all. Maya Whitfield stood in the doorway, her expression grim. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. "They are making their move." The phone displayed a police report filed mere minutes ago, alleging that Calvin had contravened his release conditions by intimidating a witness. The specifics were vague but appeared official:
cloaked in just enough procedural language to seem legitimate.
"This is impossible," Calvin exclaimed to reading the report. "I have not left my residence except for approved meetings. I have not communicated with anyone outside of authorized channels."
"Truth is irrelevant," Renee declared, already reaching for her coat. "They simply needed a procedural justification. We need to get you out of here." Red and blue lights flashed through the office windows, interrupting her sentence. Multiple patrol cars arrived outside, their deployment orchestrated for maximum impact. Through the glass, they could see Officer Maddox standing aside, observing from his personal vehicle, stripped of his badge but still orchestrating events. "Remember," Renee said quickly, gripping Calvin's arm, "say nothing. Absolutely nothing. I will be right behind you." The officers entered with practiced efficiency, their hands on their weapons, despite knowing Calvin posed no threat. They recited the violation allegations in monotonous voices, as if this were merely routine paperwork rather than calculated destruction. Calvin stood perfectly still as they cuffed him, his face a mask of dignity that rendered their display of force conspicuously excessive. Joanne openly filmed the proceedings, her phone held steady despite her palpable anger. Maya's cameraman arrived precisely in time to capture Calvin being escorted away, exactly the image the department wished to disseminate. At the police station, DA Trip Sloan was waiting, his suit impeccably neat despite the late hour. "Mr. Brooks appears incapable of adhering to simple instructions," he announced to the assembled press corps. "This pattern of erratic, non-compliant behavior substantiates our initial concerns." They placed Calvin in the same holding cell as before, the familiar sense of humiliation descending upon him like a heavy shroud. Hours elapsed in the silent, fluorescent-lit confinement. Around him, the bureaucratic machinery hummed. Papers rustled, phones rang. Justice was being postponed with every passing minute. Finally, alone in his cell, Calvin's composure fractured. His hands trembled as he pressed them to his face, stifling a sound that was a mixture of a sob and raw fury. Every rule he had followed, every system he had trusted, had been turned against him. Yet, in that moment of breakdown, something else solidified. A steely resolve that dried his tears and straightened his spine. They intended for him to vanish within their system, to become another statistic of subservience. Instead, he would become their ultimate concern, a witness who steadfastly refused to be silenced. The first hint of dawn was filtering through the high window when Renee appeared at his cell. Her voice, barely a whisper through the glass, carried the force of a hammer. "We are proceeding to the federal level today." Calvin nodded, fully comprehending the implications. No more appeasing local power structures. No more relying on corrupt systems to regulate themselves. They would elevate this matter to a level beyond the reach of badges and influence. Behind Renee, Joan stood with her ever-present notebook, already meticulously documenting this latest instance of power abuse. She had remained throughout the night, consolidating evidence of the cyber attack alongside proof of this retaliatory apprehension. Maya waited in the lobby, her camera poised to expose to the world what transpired when individuals dared to demand accountability. As the morning sun climbed higher, it cast bands of light across Calvin's cell floor. Each stripe resembled a rung on a ladder, leading upward and away from the reach of the local apparatus. They believed this cell would break him. Instead, it had become the launchpad for something far more significant than a simple charge of resisting arrest. They desired his resistance. Now, he would resist on his own terms, armed with evidence, witnesses, and federal oversight that could not be erased or detained. The era of quiet dignity had concluded. This was a conflict waged with documentation and truth, and they had inadvertently provided him with additional ammunition. The attorney meeting room within the correctional facility possessed a distinctly sterile and unwelcoming atmosphere that morning, as always.
but it was now charged with a palpable sense of anticipation. Renee Alvarez set up her laptop on the scratched surface of the table, while Calvin sat beside her, his brown overcoat rumpled from his night in custody. The video call window opened, revealing the composed countenance of Special Agent Dana Cho. "Agent Cho," Renee began, her voice remarkably steady. "Thank you for making time on such short notice." Dana Cho offered a single nod, her expression neutral yet keenly attentive. "Please, walk me through the sequence of events, Miss Alvarez." Renee shared her screen, displaying a folder structure marred by error messages and access warnings. At approximately 11:42 p.m. last night, our secure drive containing authenticated evidence was compromised. The attack was highly targeted, focusing solely on files pertinent to tomorrow's hearing. She then displayed log files illustrating numerous unauthorized access attempts. The timestamps here have been manipulated to create ambiguity regarding the original creation and modification dates of the files. This was not a random intrusion. It necessitated intimate knowledge of both our system and the specific evidence we intended to present. Calvin observed as Renee methodically outlined the digital trail, access logs, error reports, and time-stamped backups that now displayed implausible creation dates. The technical specifics painted a clear picture of deliberate sabotage. "And the retaliatory arrest?" Dana Cho inquired, her gaze fixed on something off-screen. "Filed at 12:17 a.m., Renee responded, bringing up the police report. "The timing is not subtle. They needed to discredit Mr. Brooks before we could expose the evidence tampering." Sandra Pite joined the video conference, her appearance causing a subtle adjustment in Dana Cho's posture, a silent acknowledgement between two individuals of established authority. "Internal Affairs has flagged several anomalies," Pike stated, her voice meticulously composed. "Our access logs to the evidence servers indicate similar discrepancies in timestamps. When I attempted to delve into this, I encountered considerable opposition from within the department." Dana Cho inquired, "Opposition? How so?" Pike's lips thinned. "Deliberate delays in responses, missing documentation, and conveniently scheduled system maintenance windows." "The barriers here are substantial, Agent Cho, and they're escalating by the hour." Renee opened another file, revealing screenshots of intimidating messages. "They're not merely attempting to falsify evidence," she elaborated. "They're actively threatening witnesses and cultivating an atmosphere of dread." She played a voicemail. "We'll make an example out of you." The threat, delivered with unnerving nonchalance, hung heavy in the digital air. Dana Cho leaned forward, her first overt reaction. "Who else possesses copies of these threats?" Renee confirmed, "Multiple secure repositories. Joan Pritchard, our primary witness, implemented a comprehensive backup system. She foresaw their attempts to conceal the truth." Dana Cho acknowledged, "A shrewd individual." She typed something, then addressed Calvin directly. "Mr. Brooks, have you been apprised of your rights concerning federal witness protection?" Calvin sat straighter. "Yes, ma'am, but I have no intention of relocating. This is my home, my community." Dana Cho nodded, respecting his decision without argument. "Then let us discuss the immediate actions required. Firstly, preservation orders for all pertinent servers and systems. Any attempt to delete or modify data after service will be considered federal obstruction." She detailed the process with clinical precision: server imaging, chain of custody protocols, and the necessity of seizure warrants if required. The local department's autonomy was poised for significant curtailment. "Additionally, Pike," Dana Cho continued, "my team will require unfettered access to your internal affairs records pertaining to officers Clean and Maddox." Pike replied, already making notes, "You will have them within the hour." The meeting proceeded with definitive timelines and procedural mandates. Calvin observed how vastly different this was from local assurances. No ambiguous promises, only concrete actions backed by federal authority. By early afternoon, procedural pressure led to Calvin's release. He emerged from the jail into the bright sunlight, Rene by his side, and John Pritchard waiting with a sheaf of printed logs held like academic documents. Maya Whitfield approached with her camera, maintaining a respectful distance. "Mr. Brooks, would you care to make a statement?" Calvin adjusted his tie, inhaled deeply, and spoke with quiet conviction. "The truth does not vanish simply because someone endeavors to erase it. Every threat, every false accusation, every clandestine effort to suppress evidence only underscores their fear: accountability." John stepped forward, presenting her meticulously compiled records. "The timestamps do not deceive," she asserted firmly, "and librarians do not misplace items." A crowd had gathered, the tension palpable, but Deacon Hal Mercer's presence ensured a degree of calm. He had strategically positioned church members, forming a protective cordon of dignity and support. Their silent solidarity powerfully conveyed community resilience. Maya's cameraman captured the scene, Calvin's composed determination, John's documented proof, and the tranquil assembly bearing witness. The narrative was evolving from a localized arrest to a broader exposé of systemic malfeasance meeting systematic transparency. As the afternoon sun slanted across the courthouse steps, Renee checked her phone. "Agent Cho's team is mobilizing," she reported softly. "The preservation orders are being drafted." Around them, the town's atmosphere had subtly shifted. The edifice that had appeared so formidable was revealing its vulnerabilities. Federal jurisdiction cast long shadows, and those shadows were about to fall heavily upon local law enforcement who had considered themselves beyond reproach. As dusk approached, unmarked federal vehicles began appearing in the vicinity of the police department. They parked with quiet efficiency, engines silenced, lights extinguished. Their presence served as both a promise and a warning. Justice, though sometimes delayed, possessed an inexorable and formidable power once set in motion. Inside the department, phones began to ring as news of federal intervention spread. The established order was about to confront an inconvenient reality. Some truths could not be buried beneath paperwork or intimidation. Sometimes, truth possessed a potent bite, and that bite was now accompanied by federal badges. The pre-dawn gloom enveloped the police department in shadows as 3 unmarked federal vehicles arrived in the parking lot. Special Agent Dana Cho emerged first, her dark suit immaculate despite the early hour. 6 additional agents followed, carrying equipment for evidence collection and document boxes. Lieutenant Sandra Pike awaited by the main entrance, her expression taut with professional vigilance. "Agent Cho, all preparations are complete." "Thank you, Lieutenant." Dana raised a substantial stack of warrants. "Let us commence." As they entered, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Officers on the night shift stared, suddenly engrossed in their reports. Dana's team moved with practiced efficiency, dispersing into pre-assigned groups. Chief Mallory Vance erupted from his office, his usual composure fraying. "This is entirely unwarranted. We have been fully cooperative." "Chief Vance," Dana's voice sliced through his bluster. She presented him with the first warrant. "This document authorizes the immediate seizure of all body camera footage, including backup archives and associated metadata. The second covered dispatch recordings. The third," she continued, distributing documents with the deftness of a card dealer, "encompasses server access records, internal affairs files, and all communications pertaining to Kelvin Brooks's arrest." Vance drew himself up. "Now hold on a moment." "Any interference," Dana stated, her calm certainty diminishing his authority, "constitutes obstruction of a federal investigation. Your IT personnel will provide immediate access, or we will remove the servers entirely." 2 agents were already en route to the evidence room, while another team proceeded to records. Vance watched, a spectator to the methodical intrusion into his domain by federal agents whose authority superseded his protests.
Officer Brand Clean arrived for his shift, freezing upon observing the unfolding events. His complexion drained of color as Dana approached. Officer Clean, your body camera footage from the Brooks arrest exhibits several inconsistencies with your written statement. She displayed a tablet showing parallel timestamps. Would you care to elucidate on your report of issuing clear verbal warnings when the audio evidence indicates otherwise? Clean's swagger evaporated. There must be some error in the footage timestamps are encrypted and authenticated. Dana pressed on. They cannot be altered without leaving digital traces. Would you prefer to revise your statement now? In a corner office, two agents were meticulously imaging Officer Ross Maddox's phone. Text messages scrolled across their screens, revealing conversations that treated resistance as a preordained outcome rather than an observed event. "Observe this," one agent remarked, highlighting a message exchanged hours before the arrest, indicating prior discussion of the incident's narrative. Dana examined the screen. The texts clearly depicted officers devising a narrative rather than responding to circumstances. She made notes while her team continued data extraction. Outside the building, District Attorney Tripp Sloan conducted an impromptu press conference, his typically assertive tone shifting to a defensive posture. "This is nothing more than political theatrics," he declared to the assembled reporters, "a squandering of federal resources to placate activists." Maya Whitfield interjected, "Mr. Sloan, how do you address the evidence of timestamp manipulation, the documented attempts to alter records?" "Those allegations are entirely—" "I have the server logs right here," Maya countered, holding up her tablet, displaying access times, deletion attempts, and modified metadata. "Numbers do not possess political affiliation, sir." Across town, Calvin sat at his kitchen table, his hands cradling a now cold coffee mug. Renee had been explicit. "Stay home, stay calm. Let the system function for once." Joan Pritchard's car was parked across the street, her presence a comforting, strategic reassurance. Her security cameras meticulously recorded every passing vehicle, every face that lingered too long at Calvin's residence. "Another patrol car," Joan texted. "Third pass. I have the plate numbers." Back at the station, Dana's team meticulously worked through the evidence room. They discovered gaps in the body camera archives, conveniently timed deletions that left digital fingerprints. The dispatch recordings indicated selective preservation, with key moments during Calvin's arrest conspicuously absent. "Chief Vance," Dana called out, "could you explain the omission of these specific timeframes?" Vance's polish had completely disintegrated. "System maintenance, routine cleanup." "During an active investigation, after preservation orders were issued," Dana noted, making another entry. "That's a peculiar choice." As the morning sun climbed higher, federal agents transported sealed evidence boxes to their vehicles. Each container held another fragment of the truth: emails, text messages, falsified reports, and digital traces of obstruction. Inside the department, phones continued to ring. Officers conversed in hushed tones in corners. The seemingly monolithic apparatus was being dismantled by individuals impervious to intimidation or deflection. Maya Whitfield stood outside, reporting live. "Federal agents are executing multiple warrants following allegations of tampering and obstruction. This situation stems from the arrest of Kelvin Brooks, who was charged with resisting arrest despite video evidence demonstrating full compliance. His contact with the White House liaison initiated an investigation that has uncovered what appears to be systematic evidence manipulation." She turned to face a different camera angle. "The timeline is critical here. Mr. Brooks was arrested at gunpoint, charged with resisting, and as evidence supporting his innocence surfaced, records began to disappear. The federal response has been swift and coordinated." Near midday, Dana Cho emerged from the building, carrying the final evidence box. She paused briefly,
her expression unreadable as cameras focused on her.
"Agent Shaw," Maya called out. "What happens next?" Dana carefully placed the box in her vehicle, her voice clear in the sudden quiet. "The evidence indicates multiple instances of obstruction. That is now a component of our investigation." She closed the car door with a solid thud that seemed to resonate across the parking lot. The apparatus had relinquished its hold on the truth, one sealed box at a time. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the courthouse, casting long shadows across the packed gallery. Every wooden bench creaked under the weight of spectators, their hushed whispers creating a tense atmosphere. Calvin Brooks sat beside Renee Alvarez at the defense table, his brown overcoat draped neatly over the chair back, his blue tie perfectly straight. 3 thick binders lay before Renee, each meticulously labeled. Behind them, Joan Pritchard occupied the front row, her silver hair gleaming, her gaze fixed and intent, much like a librarian observing improper handling of a rare volume. District Attorney Trip Sloan entered with his characteristic commanding presence, though his confidence today seemed more performance than genuine assurance. He arranged his materials with practiced flourish, barely acknowledging the defense table. "All rise," the bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. Judge Margaret Howard entered, her robes settling as she took her seat. Her eyes surveyed the courtroom, briefly resting on the unusually large contingent of federal agents. Case number 2023 CR 789, State versus Calvin Brooks, the clerk announced. Hearing on defense motion to dismiss. Sloan rose smoothly. "Your Honor, the state maintains these charges are properly filed and supported by, if I may..." Renee's voice, carrying clear authority, interrupted. As she stood, she opened the first binder. "We possess evidence that directly contradicts not only the charge, but the integrity of the prosecution itself." The judge leaned forward. "Proceed, Miss Alvarez." Renee held up a USB drive in a sealed evidence bag. "This contains Miss Joan Pritchard's original doorbell camera footage, demonstrating Mr. Brooks's complete compliance during the arrest. The timestamps are authenticated." She placed it on the evidence table. "And this," she lifted another sealed bag, "contains the department's attempted deletions of their own body camera footage recovered by federal forensics." Chief Mallory Vance shifted uncomfortably in his seat near the front, his polished facade unable to conceal his clenched jaw. "Furthermore," Renee continued, opening the second binder, "we have internal affairs documentation indicating systematic attempts to alter evidence subsequent to the issuance of preservation orders." Lieutenant Sandra Pike's sworn statement details multiple instances of tampering. Sloan's face tightened. "Your Honor, these allegations are entirely..." "Not allegations, Mr. Sloan. Rennie Stone could have frozen summer. Federal Agent Dana Cho's preliminary findings." She slid a document toward the bench. "Note the timestamps of the deletion attempts in relation to when the White House liaison made initial contact." Maya Whitfield's pen moved rapidly across her notepad in the press section. Her camera operator focused on Sloan's increasingly rigid posture. Judge Howard examined the documents, her expression darkening. "Mr. Sloan, are you asserting that your office was unaware of this evidence tampering?" "Your Honor, we maintain that any technical issues were purely technical issues." Rennie opened a third binder. Page 47 displays text messages between Officers Klein and Maddox discussing how to fabricate the resisting charge before they ever encountered Mr. Brooks. Page 53 contains their deleted drafts, illustrating how they constructed the narrative retrospectively. The gallery's whispers intensified. Linda Sutter, who had been sitting proudly near the front, began to edge toward the exit. "And here," Renee lifted another document, "is proof that dispatch recordings were selectively erased after federal preservation orders were issued. The gaps align precisely with moments that would have exposed the false narrative." Judge Howard's patience visibly waned. Mr. Sloan, does the state wish to offer an explanation for these discrepancies? Sloan stood, but his usual commanding presence lacked substance. Your Honor, while there may be some procedural irregularities, the judge's voice could have etched steel. Miss Alvarez has presented evidence of systematic tampering, false reporting, and obstruction of a federal investigation. This is not irregular, Mr. Sloan. This is misconduct. The courtroom fell silent. Calvin sat perfectly still, his dignity a quiet refutation of all who had sought to diminish it. Your Honor, Renee stood again. Given the demonstrated pattern of evidence manipulation and false charging, we move for dismissal with prejudice. The state has proven it cannot be entrusted with this case's integrity. Judge Howard studied the documents once more, her expression severe. Several long moments passed before she looked up. This court has witnessed many disturbing occurrences, she began. However, the systematic attempt to destroy an innocent man's life through fabricated charges, evidence tampering, and orchestrated harassment reaches a new low. She fixed Sloan with a stern gaze. The motion to dismiss is granted with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering a comprehensive inquiry into misconduct related to this case. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Chief Vance's face had gone ashen. Linda Sutter slipped out the back door. Mr. Brooks, Judge Howard's voice softened slightly. This court owes you an apology. You were subjected to a gross abuse of power and subsequently victimized again by attempts to conceal it. She gathered her papers. This case is dismissed. Court is adjourned. The gavel strike seemed to reverberate. Calvin rose slowly, his composure intact. Joan Pritchard beamed from the gallery, her meticulous documentation vindicated. Maya Whitfield was already typing rapidly on her phone, disseminating the news. Renee gathered their materials with precise care. They departed together, past Sloan's rigid back, past Chief Vance's crumbling authority, past all the power that had attempted to crush Calvin. The courthouse steps gleamed in the late morning sun. Calvin took his first truly deep breath as a free man, feeling its warmth on his face. Now comes the consequences phase, Renee remarked beside him. The afternoon sun beat down on the City Hall steps as cameras and microphones converged around the makeshift podium. The media presence was unprecedented for their small town. Local stations mingled with regional affiliates, all drawn by the narrative of power finally facing repercussions. Lieutenant Sandra Pike approached the microphones, her internal affairs badge glinting in the light. Her typically stern expression carried added weight today. Behind her, Special Agent Dana Cho stood in quiet observation, her federal authority lending gravity to every word about to be spoken. Good afternoon, Pike began, her voice clear and unwavering. Following a comprehensive internal investigation, we have identified multiple serious policy violations within our department. She lifted a document. These include false reporting, evidence tampering, and abuse of authority. The cameras clicked incessantly. Maya Whitfield stood front row center, her notebook ready, determined to accurately record every detail. Officers Brent Clean and Ross Maddox have been terminated, effective immediately, Pike continued. We are initiating decertification proceedings through the state board. This is not a resignation or a transfer. This is a termination for cause. Calvin stood to the side with Renee Alvarez, witnessing the careers of his persecutors crumble in the sunlight. Joan Pritchard smiled thinly beside him, her meticulous documentation having contributed to this pivotal moment. Deacon Hal Mercer placed a steadying hand on Calvin's shoulder. Additionally, Pike's voice cut through the growing murmur, we have referred our findings to federal authorities for a review of potential civil rights violations. Special Agent Cho stepped forward, her presence immediately commanding attention.
The FBI's Civil Rights Division has commenced a formal investigation into both the initial incident and subsequent attempts to obstruct justice through evidence tampering. From the assembled crowd, a voice called out, "What about Chief Vance?" As if cued, Chief Mallory Vance emerged from City Hall, his uniform pristine, but his authority visibly diminished. He approached the podium with a rehearsed dignity that fooled no one. After careful consideration, he began, his politician's voice strained. "I believe it is in the department's best interest that I step down, effective immediately." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Whispers, scattered applause, and the rapid fire of camera shutters capturing his downfall. Maya Whitfield's pen moved swiftly, recording the carefully chosen words of a man attempting to control his own disgrace. "Chief," Maya called out, "are you resigning because of the federal investigation?" Vance's polished smile faltered slightly. "I am choosing to prioritize the department's well-being." "Are you anticipating criminal charges?" another reporter interjected. Before Vance could respond, Special Agent Cho spoke again. "The investigation will follow the evidence wherever it leads, irrespective of rank or position." The former chief retreated, his attempt at dignity overshadowed by the stark reality of his failure. Calvin watched him depart, recalling how Vance had dismissed his complaints with such casual authority just days prior. District Attorney Trip Sloan was conspicuously absent, but his presence lingered in the subsequent announcement. Pike presented an additional document. "The State Bar Association has received a formal complaint concerning the adjudication of this matter," she announced. The complaint outlined numerous instances of prosecutorial impropriety, including the pursuit of charges despite irrefutable evidence of the accused's innocence. From the assembled onlookers, Linda Sutter attempted to depart discreetly, but Joan Pritchard's clear voice halted her. "Mrs. Sutter, would you care to elaborate on your involvement in this affair?" The accuser, whose allegations had been fabricated, hastily retreated, her former desire for public notice having completely vanished. Several senior inhabitants who had been present during the initial apprehension nodded solemnly, their long-held silence finally broken. Renee Alvarez stepped forward to field inquiries regarding civil proceedings. Mr. Brooks's fundamental rights had been infringed upon systematically and intentionally. We are committed to ensuring complete accountability through every available legal avenue. Questions rained down with rapid intensity. Will a civil lawsuit be initiated? What about the suppressed evidence? Are other cases undergoing review? Renee addressed each query with unwavering precision, ensuring that factual accuracy remained paramount over emotional response. Calvin stood by her side, his dignity unblemished, his ubiquitous brown overcoat and blue tie a stark reminder of the ordinary day that unchecked power had attempted to dismantle. Deacon Hulmer spoke softly to the community members congregating around them. "This endeavor is not about retribution," he emphasized. "It is about safeguarding against future repetitions." Maya Whitfield's live broadcast meticulously documented every salient detail. Former officers Clean and Maddox have been dismissed and are facing decertification, a consequence that will permanently preclude them from serving in law enforcement capacities. Chief Vance has tendered his resignation under the weight of overwhelming evidence of departmental malfeasance. The district attorney's office is now subject to stringent ethical examination. The situation transcends a singular incident. It represents the culmination of systemic abuses finally confronting their repercussions. The afternoon sun began its descent, casting elongated shadows across the steps of City Hall. Calvin's mobile device vibrated in his pocket. He stepped aside to respond, listening intently as his employer communicated. "Mr. Brooks, we have thoroughly reviewed the circumstances," his supervisor stated. "We wish to reinstate you immediately. Your position is guaranteed, and we will expedite the processing of your back pay for the period of your involuntary absence as promptly as possible."
Calvin expressed his gratitude with quiet sincerity, his voice remarkably composed. Upon his return to the group, Joan was the first to observe his placid demeanor. "Positive news?" she inquired. "My job is back," he replied simply, "with back pay." Renee offered a nod of profound satisfaction. One more facet of justice secured. The crowd gradually began to disperse as the press conference concluded. Lieutenant Pike and Agent Cho gathered their documentation, their work far from complete, yet the public declaration had been made. The consequences had materialized, evident and undeniable, in the very public arena where authority had once presumed itself to be beyond reproach. Calvin adjusted his tie, a simple gesture imbued with the significance of restored self-respect. The established order had endeavored to shatter him through intimidation, authority, and fabricated accusations. Instead, the truth had effectively dismantled the system's ingrained presumption of immunity. Morning sunlight stretched long shadows across the suburban thoroughfare where Calvin Brooks's ordeal had commenced mere days prior. He retraced the identical path, clad in the familiar brown overcoat and blue tie, yet every other aspect had undergone a profound transformation.
The quietude that now enveloped him was not the deceptive tranquility of enforced silence. It was the stillness of truth, finally being acknowledged. Joan Pritchard walked alongside him, her librarian's characteristic meticulousness proving to be as potent a defense as any formidable weapon. She carried a folder filled with documents, each page a crucial component in the edifice of accountability they had meticulously constructed. At 72 years of age, she moved with the quiet contentment of an individual who had witnessed justice prevail not through vociferous protest, but through unwavering and exhaustive record-keeping. "Observe these meticulously kept gardens," Joan commented, gesturing towards the orderly flower beds. "Everyone exhibits such concern for outward appearances, yet no one was willing to speak out when it truly mattered." Calvin concurred, noticing the furtive glances from neighbors peering through their curtains as they passed. Some offered tentative waves, while others rapidly withdrew from view. The street had effectively transformed into a stage where power had attempted to project dominance and ultimately faltered. Deacon Hal Mercer followed a few paces behind, his presence exuding both protection and inherent dignity. He had been instrumental in galvanizing community support without transforming Calvin's struggle into a public spectacle. Now, he carried himself with a quiet pride of one who had aligned himself with the righteous course of history. "The church board voted unanimously," Hal announced, breaking the morning's hushed atmosphere. "We are offering the use of our community room for the legal aid meetings, entirely without charge." They approached the designated area where Renee Alvarez awaited, her briefcase laden with the essential paperwork of their triumph. She had already arranged the space, with chairs set in a circular configuration rather than rigid rows, reflecting the collaborative nature of their undertaking, which aimed to foster enduring change. Maya Whitfield arrived with her camera operator, who discreetly set up equipment in a corner. She had meticulously earned their trust by steadfastly refusing to sensationalize the narrative, instead concentrating on the unvarnished facts that had led to the downfall of influential figures. The attendance surpassed expectations, with numerous individuals filtering in. Elderly residents who had remained silent for years, anxious young parents concerned about their children's future interactions with authority, and even a contingent of retired law enforcement officers disillusioned by the department's conduct. Calvin stood at the forefront, his posture erect yet unpretentious. "I extend my sincere gratitude to each of you for your presence," he commenced, his voice resonating with the same measured composure that had consistently confounded Officer Klein's attempts to provoke him. "We are gathered today to announce a tangible development." Renee stepped forward, meticulously outlining the framework they had collaboratively devised.
"We are formally establishing the Community Legal Aid Fund," she explained. "It has already secured initial financial contributions and commitments from several prominent law firms. Our initiative extends beyond merely providing legal counsel. It encompasses the implementation of evidence preservation protocols, comprehensive civilian oversight training, and immediate support mechanisms." Joanne contributed her perspective. "We have developed a straightforward documentation system accessible to all residents. This system provides clear, concise steps for preserving critical evidence and meticulously establishing event timelines. Such measures significantly impede the potential for truth to be obscured or lost." Through the window, Linda Sutter was visible across the street, partially obscured by a large tree. She observed the gathering, her countenance etched with a complex interplay of emotions as she grappled with the ramifications of her deceitful report. The influence she had erroneously believed herself to possess had ultimately backfired, exposing the underlying iniquities within the very system she had sought to manipulate. Maya's camera continued to record as Calvin expounded upon the practical implications of their efforts. The dismissal with prejudice ensures that these charges cannot be refiled. The officer's termination and subsequent decertification preclude them from simply transferring to different jurisdictions. The chief's resignation and the district attorney's ethical complaint demonstrate that those who enable such conduct will also face accountability. However, he paused, making direct eye contact with various members of the community. That addresses the punitive aspect. Our primary focus is on constructing robust protective measures. He elaborated further. The federal investigation remains ongoing, and we have established direct channels to ensure the timely transmittal of pertinent evidence to the appropriate authorities. Renee detailed specific protective measures. "We have secured commitments for the formation of civilian oversight boards endowed with genuine authority. Body camera footage will undergo an independent review process. All complaint procedures will be subject to stringent transparency requirements." The meeting proceeded with discussions on practicalities, funding structures, reporting protocols, and training schedules. This was not merely a celebratory gathering. It was the earnest commencement of constructing enduring societal change. "I was not resisting," Calvin asserted with unwavering conviction, his words imbued with the gravity of first-hand experience. "I was attempting to survive. Now, we are establishing safeguards to ensure that no one else is compelled to face such adversity in isolation." Heads nodded in agreement throughout the room. His pronouncements resonated deeply with everyone who had ever suppressed their grievances, believing that silence offered security. As the meeting drew to a close, individuals lingered to share personal accounts. An elderly gentleman recounted a traffic stop that had escalated inappropriately. A young mother expressed her anxieties concerning her teenage son's potential encounters with law enforcement. Each narrative underscored the urgent necessity for systemic reform, extending beyond individual acts of justice. Outside, Linda Sutter had vanished, yet the indelible mark of her actions persisted as a stark cautionary reminder of how easily superficial concern could devolve into deliberate malevolence. The afternoon sun cast its final rays as Calvin finally made his way homeward, his street now imbued with a palpable sense of transformation. It was not perfect, nor entirely devoid of apprehension, but undeniably altered. Neighbors who had previously concealed themselves behind drawn curtains now emerged onto their porches to offer greetings. The prevailing power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He ascended his front steps, keys jangling softly in his hand. It was the very same porch from which, just days prior, he had stepped out into what he had perceived as an unremarkable morning. He now understood with profound clarity. No morning could be considered ordinary when one resided within systems desperately in need of fundamental restructuring. Within the confines of his residence, Calvin proceeded with his evening routine with a deliberate and calming cadence. He carefully hung his overcoat, smoothing the brown fabric that had become emblematic of his resilience under duress. His fingers meticulously adjusted the knot of his blue tie, the identical one he had worn during the period when they had sought to undermine his spirit. Standing before the mirror in his hallway, Calvin carefully removed the tie from his collar and placed it neatly on a hanger, a simple act carrying the profound weight of a victory hard won, not passively received. Each crease and fold represented a conscious decision to maintain his integrity, to meticulously document the truth, and to actively build protective measures rather than passively seek retribution.